November 24th, 1971. A man is sitting in seat 18C on a commercial flight. Dark suit, black tie, sunglasses. He orders a bourbon and soda. He pays for it politely. Then he hands a note to the flight attendant. She assumes it's a phone number. She pockets it without reading. He leans over, quietly, calmly, and says, "Miss, you better look at that note." She opens it. It reads, "I have a bomb. I will use it if necessary. You are being hijacked." That man got exactly what he demanded. He then strapped on a parachute, opened the back door of a plane flying at 10,000 feet, and jumped into a storm at night over one of the most unforgiving forests on Earth. He was never found. Not his body, not his parachute, and almost not his money. This is not fiction. This happened. And 50 years later, the FBI still doesn't know who he was. Keep one detail in mind. He specifically requested 4 parachutes. 2 primary, 2 reserve. Why 4? We'll come back to this. It changes everything. Portland, Oregon, Wednesday, November 24th, 1971. The day before Thanksgiving. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 is preparing to depart. A 40-minute hop from Portland to Seattle. Routine, unremarkable. 136 passengers and crew, including a man who checked in under the name Dan Cooper. Her name was Florence Schaffner, 23 years old, a flight attendant on her regular shift. She remembers him as quiet, well-dressed, unremarkable. He sat in the rear of the plane. He didn't look nervous. He wasn't sweating. He wasn't scanning the cabin. He was just there, sipping his drink like any other businessman flying home before the holiday. When he handed her the folded note, Florence slipped it into her pocket without looking. She assumed it was a phone number. She was wrong. The note read, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase. I will use it if necessary. I want you to sit next to me. You are being hijacked." Florence did not scream. She did not run. She sat down beside him, and she asked, quietly, to see the bomb. He opened his briefcase, just slightly, just enough. Red cylinders, wires, a battery. Real or fake, she couldn't tell. She didn't wait to find out. His demands were specific. $200,000 in cash, negotiable $20 bills, 4 parachutes, 2 primary, 2 reserve, a fuel truck ready in Seattle, and no tricks, no heroes. The airline contacted the FBI. The FBI contacted the police. And then, in a decision that would echo through aviation history, everyone agreed. The plane landed in Seattle. Passengers were told there was a mechanical issue. They were let off one by one. The FBI had photographed every single serial number on those bills, all 10,000 of them. And when the last passenger stepped off that plane, Florence Schaffner was still on board, along with the rest of the crew, and a paper bag containing $200,000 in cash. He had his money. He had his parachutes. The plane was in the air again. And what happened next, in the next 19 minutes, defies every explanation investigators have come up with in 50 years. The plane was back in the air, heading toward Mexico City, low and slow, as Cooper had instructed. No higher than 10,000 feet. Landing gear down, wing flaps partially extended. Outside, -7 degrees Celsius. Wind speed, 150 miles per hour. And below, an unnapped wilderness of Douglas fir trees, some over 200 feet tall. Here's something most people don't know. Almost no commercial aircraft in the world have a door that can open in flight. The Boeing 727 was an exception. It had a rear air stair, a built-in door at the back of the plane that could be deployed in midair. Originally designed for airports without jetways. But on November 24th, 1971, it became an exit door for the most audacious escape in aviation history. After this incident, Boeing quietly modified all 727s to include what became known as the Cooper vane, a device that prevents the rear air stair from being lowered in flight, named after a man nobody could name. At approximately 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the dense forests of southwestern Washington state, the crew felt a bump. A slight pressure change. Nothing dramatic. The rear air stair had been lowered. A man had walked to the back of the plane and stepped off the edge of the world. Florence Schaffner was still on that plane when it happened. She felt the pressure change. She knew what it meant. She later said she never heard a sound. No scream, no impact, just nothing, like he had simply ceased to exist. The U.S. Army searched. The National Guard searched. The FBI coordinated the largest manhunt in Pacific Northwest history. Helicopters swept the wilderness. Ground teams pushed through terrain so dense they could barely move. For weeks, nothing. No body, no parachute, no Cooper. Remember, he took a specific parachute. Not the best one available. Not the military-grade one. He grabbed one of the civilian training chutes. Was that a mistake? Or was it intentional? Hold that thought. If he died in that jump, the case is closed. A desperate man made a fatal mistake. But what if he didn't die? What if the money that turned up on a riverbank 9 years later is proof that D.B. Cooper was alive and laughing? February 10, 1980. 8 years, 2 months, and 17 days after the hijacking, a boy named Brian Ingram is on a family picnic at Tena Bar, a sandy beach on the north bank of the Columbia River. He is digging in the sand, and he finds something, a rubber-banded bundle of paper, rotted, decayed, falling apart at the edges. He pulls it out. It's cash. $20 bills. The FBI tested the serial numbers. Every single one. Matched. $5,880 from the original Cooper ransom. Confirmed. Real. And then the questions started. Because here's the problem. Tena Bar is on the north bank of the Columbia River. The river flows west. If the money had washed naturally downstream from the likely jump zone, it would be further west. Not here. Not in this exact spot. Rivers don't work the way most people imagine. Items dropped into rivers don't travel in a straight line. They eddy. They sink. They get buried under sediment, then re-exposed decades later during floods. The Columbia River experienced major flooding in 1974, 3 years after the hijacking. These floods may have redistributed the money from its original resting place, moving it upstream, or depositing it in unexpected locations. But here's what that means for the case. The money could have traveled from almost anywhere in the river system, which means it tells us almost nothing about where Cooper actually landed. The money at Tena Bar was the only physical evidence ever confirmed from the D.B. Cooper case. The only piece of the puzzle the FBI could hold in their hands. And it raised more questions than it answered. So who was he? Over 50 years, investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths have produced dozens of suspects. 3 of them are so compelling, so specific, that they changed the direction of the FBI investigation itself. In 50 years, the FBI investigated over 1,000 suspects. 1,000. None were ever charged, but 3 cases stand apart. Suspect 1, Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., former Army Green Beret, paratrooper, Sunday school teacher, family man. Just 4 months after D.B. Cooper's jump, April 7, 1972, McCoy hijacked a United Airlines flight. Same method, same style. He demanded $500,000 and 4 parachutes. He successfully jumped from the aircraft. He was caught days later, with the ransom money still in his possession. He was an expert parachutist. He fit the physical description almost perfectly. He clearly had prior knowledge of how a Cooper-style hijacking worked, perhaps because he'd done it before. The FBI officially rejected McCoy as Cooper. Multiple witnesses said Cooper was older. The voices didn't match, and McCoy had a verified alibi. McCoy was shot and killed during a prison escape in 1974. He took whatever he knew with him. Florence Schaffner was shown photos of McCoy. She said she wasn't certain.
He was there
After everything she'd been through, after sitting next to that man for 2 hours on that plane, she still wasn't certain. That says everything about how ordinary D.B. Cooper seemed. Suspect 2, L.D. Cooper. In 2011, a woman named Marla Cooper came forward. She said her uncle, Lynn Doyle Cooper, confessed to the hijacking. He reportedly told her mother, shortly after Thanksgiving 1971, that he'd done something terrible. He appeared injured, disoriented. Marla Cooper submitted a guitar strap she believed he had used in the jump. DNA testing was conducted. Results inconclusive. The FBI investigated and closed the lead. L.D. Cooper died in 1999. Suspect 3, Robert Rackstraw. A former U.S. Army paratrooper, con man, and convicted felon. Rackstraw was actually investigated by the FBI during the original Norjack probe. He was cleared, insufficient evidence. But a private investigator named Thomas Colbert spent over a decade building a new case against him. In 2016, Colbert's team claimed to have found coded messages hidden in the original Cooper letters, pointing directly to Rackstraw. The FBI reviewed the theory and found it unconvincing. Independent cryptographers were skeptical. No physical evidence linked Rackstraw to the hijacking. He died in 2019, still uncharged. 3 suspects, 3 compelling cases, none confirmed. Remember the 4 parachutes? Investigators now believe this was intentional misdirection. If Cooper had demanded only 1 parachute, the FBI might have sabotaged it. By demanding 4, he forced them to hand over working chutes, because they couldn't be certain which one he'd use. This was not the move of a desperate man. This was the move of someone who had thought through. In 1971, airport security was almost non-existent. You could walk onto a plane carrying almost anything. No metal detectors, no bag x-rays, no ID checks. You bought a ticket, you walked on. D.B. Cooper knew this, and he exploited it perfectly. Between 1968 and 1972, there were over 130 hijacking attempts on U.S. South aircraft alone. D.B. Cooper's hijacking was the most famous, but it was part of a wave. By January 5, 1973, just 14 months after Flight 305, the FAA mandated that all passengers must be screened before boarding any commercial flight in the United States. Every passenger, every bag. That rule has not changed since. Here's what doesn't fit neatly into any official report. D.B. Cooper became a folk hero. Not a criminal, not a terrorist, a hero. The town of Ariel, Washington held an annual D.B. Cooper Days celebration for decades. People came in dark suits and clip-on ties. They drank bourbon. They celebrated a man who, by all legal definitions, committed armed extortion and air piracy. Why? Because 1971 was not a happy year in America. Vietnam was tearing the country apart. Nixon was in the White House. Economic anxiety was rising. Trust in institutions was collapsing. And into that atmosphere, a man in a business suit with a briefcase beat the airline, beat the FBI, beat the system, and vanished. For a lot of people, that felt like something. On July 12, 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI officially suspended active investigation of the D.B. Cooper case. Not closed, suspended. They kept the case file open. They accepted it could never be solved, and they walked away. Florence Schaffner continued working as a flight attendant. Tina Mucklow, the other flight attendant who spent the most time with Cooper, eventually entered a convent. She gave very few interviews. A person who knew her said she simply did not want to relive what happened. 36 people were on that flight. 36 people spent hours not knowing if a man in C-18C was going to blow them out of the sky. History made Cooper a legend. It did not ask them how they felt about that. Here's what we know. On November 24th, 1971, a man who called himself Dan Cooper hijacked Northwest Orient Flight 305. He extorted $200,000 from an airline. He parachuted into a rainstorm over the Pacific Northwest. He was never found. $5,880 of his ransom money surfaced on a riverbank 9 years later. Over 1,000 suspects were investigated. 0 were ever charged. Here is what we don't know: who he was, whether he survived, whether he sat somewhere in a diner or a bar or a quiet house, watching the news coverage of himself, whether he ever told anyone, whether there is a grave somewhere in those forests that nobody has found yet. And here is what I keep thinking about. The FBI spent 45 years on this case, thousands of agent hours, millions of dollars, the best investigators in the country, and a man in a suit with a briefcase and a note beat all of them. Not with violence, not with an army, with a parachute and the dark. Somewhere out there, or nowhere at all, D.B. Cooper is either the greatest unsolved mystery in American criminal history, or he's just bones, and we'll never know which. The FBI suspended the D.B. Cooper investigation in 2016. The case remains officially open. No suspect has ever been charged. The remaining $194,120 has never